If we're gonna heal, let it be glorious.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Welcome to episode 1 of the Black Walk interview series.
Got it.
Part 1, the organizers.
So yeah. Oh my goodness. So just like first thing we can just like go around and share just like what is everybody's like name and class year if they're like comfortable sharing. Also if you're not comfortable sharing, that's like fine too. We can just like go. But my name's Noëll and I'm a junior this year.
I'm Amanda, I'm a sophomore.
Madie, I'm a sophomore.
I'm Kuno, I'm a first year.
My name is Jason, I am a sophomore.
I'm Zion, I'm also a first year.
I'm Uche, I'm a senior.
I'm Roro, and I'm also a senior.
If you could describe the walkout in 3 words, what would they be and why? So if people just want to like sit and think about that for a sec.
Someone just asked me the other day to describe myself in 3 words, so I have some practice for this. It's hard.
Can I give it a go?
Yeah.
Yes, I would say like enthusiastic, well prepared, but not well received. So that's like, I know that's like, so there's a hyphen between like, a couple of those words. That's not included, but enthusiastic, well prepared, and not well received.
I would say humbling. I would say for me personally, it was necessary. And I would say it was a lesson, like a learning experience, even though that's not really a word. So.
Are we allowed to swear?
Yeah. Go
For
on.
me, I think a 3-word phrase that describes it is some necessary shit. Both good and bad, however you interpret that word. Only because I think the conversations that led up to it and the conversations that have happened since then, like, could all be traced to kind of what happened in December. So that's why I say it's some necessary shit.
I would say passionate for the first one. Because I feel like there was a lot of passion amongst like people organizing and like different people's reactions to it. The second one I would say educational, both like from being like semi-involved and also from like observing. I think I learned a lot about like activism and like brown and like black at brown, which I thought was really interesting. For the last one, I would say maybe frustrating because there were some points where I did feel like very frustrated, with myself, with other people, with the community at large. So that's what I'll say.
I'd say it was challenging, it was surprising, and I'm thinking definitely like reflective in that it made me reflect, but I think reflective in a double sense in that it was like reflective in and of itself of a lot of themes, of problems, of issues that needed to be addressed in a larger sense. But then for me personally, it led to a lot of critical reflection and analysis of my ideas. And then, so the other ones, the reason I said surprising was obviously it was not received as I had anticipated it would be, and I think that was interesting for me. It was surprising and challenging, dealing with that surprise, dealing with the fact that things don't always go the way that you're anticipated, and how are you going to use that to fuel you or to motivate you or to change you in certain ways.
I think the first word I would the first word that comes to mind for me is like historic. Like, I think, I guess the whole process, but just in tandem with the alumni weekend and the there was like the first Black Convocation, like, and I was the first year, so it was like, you know, there's that, and then the alumni weekend, and then kind of researching and then learning all about this history of, you know, the Black experience at Brown, kind of building up to this thing. It all felt very like historic, like we were part of like a bigger like narrative. So I would definitely say historic. Then like my second word would be cathartic, because I feel like just throughout from like everybody involved and just everybody like who I saw at pretty much every step of the way, it was like a lot. I felt like there was a lot kind of behind it, you know, especially like towards the end. Like I felt like just as a whole, I felt like as a first year, like I kind of got a sense of like, I guess there was a lot of release that happened, like before and after it, that, like we just said, like needed to happen. It felt like, you know, for as much of the, I guess, frustration that came with it, like I felt like emotionally, like for the community, like it was beneficial. And then like, I think the last word I would say would be like, maybe overwhelming, just because like I feel like when it started, like it was only like 4 people, and it was kind of like, oh, like we're gonna do this thing, but then by the end, like it felt like such a like life or death situation, like the fate of Blackness at Brown, like, was hanging in the balance, and it was like this huge thing, and like part of that, like, you know, I feel like was a good thing, like it felt important, but at the same time it was like, I don't know that I was really ready to like bear that all at once. So yeah, just like the scope was
Yeah, I really feel the word cathartic. I was thinking a lot of the word consuming, and just how I felt like absolutely consumed by all the things that we were fighting for, and then all of the things that we were hearing from other people, and all the feelings that I had about Brown. And ultimately, I feel like I also like the word humbling. And I think that, like, for personally, I walked away being like, okay, I want to feel as personally connected as I felt to everything that we were doing, but I can't feel this consumed by it ever again because it's not sustainable. Which we like want things to be sustainable because we want to create change collectively, like over long periods of time. But yeah,
I'd say really quickly, like loving. I feel like I feel like there was just like a lot of love, and it was like a labor of love. Hectic, because it was just hectic. Especially, I don't think it was hectic at the beginning, but that like ends was a real like a plot twist, kind of like it's very Game of Thrones. And then I was struggling for a third one, but cathartic was like it. It just felt like a good like exhale in a lot of ways. And like an important one, I think. But yeah. Part of this is meant to be something that like people will hear later and hopefully like have ascertain some types of details around. So does anybody feel comfortable kind of giving maybe like a broad timeline of like kind of like beginning to end possibly, or and also a more specific timeline toward like the end of things? I don't know how comfortable people feel with that, but also like it doesn't have to be super specific. Just kind of like saying what happened and like what we're even talking about.
Right.
I can attempt to. So I think, well, the impetus for this really came given the historic, as Zion said, time in which it fell, given that it was the 50th anniversary of the 1968 walkout. So I think in many ways it originated as building upon what we perceived as the momentum, the energy that was building on campus as a result of that. I think a lot of us felt that if there was a time where we needed to continue the efforts that were began in 1968. It was now, and that as a result of that year, it would be best received now. And so I think the idea began with like Noëll and Amanda. I think probably for me, it came about at one of these MPC workshops. We were talking about just Brown's complicity generally in oppression, in its lack of recognition and awareness of like how it contributes to social problems, whether that be like not paying taxes in Providence, etc. And I was like, yo, we should do what they did in 1968. We should have a walkout. And then I heard from Noëll reached out, and they were like, we're making a walkout. I was like, oh shit, we should do that. And I think that's probably how a lot of people got involved. Like, it just felt like something that was right, that we should do, and that it was the time for that action. And so it just began like planning in Smitty B once or twice a week, right? And then
I forget where.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
I think it began in Smitty B. And there were a lot of people at those meetings. And then it moved to the BCSC, where a controversial space, given that that's what we were, part of our demands were to try to revamp it or to reconceive a black space for students at Brown. But I think, we made this space into by the end, it was like a very sacred space. Like, I felt every time I would return here that I was like returning to some sort of it was very sacred. And so that was where a lot of the organizing happened. We split up into a couple groups, researching to draft our demands, outreach, and like to reach out to different student groups and stuff like that. What were some other, like publicity, media, and stuff like that. So I'd say it was very well organized from the jump. I mean, obviously there were mistakes that were made, and it was a long process. It was about like 2 months or more in the making. And then we created our video, which featured President Paxson speaking, which featured a lot of the historic impetus, as we said. And then once that was released, like our campaign went public. We had a Facebook page, which generated an unbelievable amount of support within. I think that was, we were talking about overwhelming. Like, that was a little bit overwhelming for me. The fact that we got so much support from the jump, both in terms of people wanting to donate supplies or money, or like, it just felt very real. But at the same time, for me, like, I felt like that kind of took away something from it. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, I couldn't tell how authentic all of that support was, and it just, I don't know, it kind of felt like it detracted in some ways for me personally. But anyway, so that happened, and then we had some community meetings where we would meet with the broader Brown Black community, Black students, and that's where some of like the issues began in terms of how we received it. That led to some discussions, which we'll probably talk about later. And then, so the ultimate goal was to have people walk out to Congdon Street Baptist Church and stay there for a couple days, or until Brown University accepted the list of demands that we had crafted. It ended up changing slightly and becoming more of a reflection or a commemoration of 1968, just in terms of, I guess we can talk about like why that change ended up happening, but I'd say that's basically the sequence of events that transpired.
I think that was interesting. Like, would you say like that it becoming so big, like, took away something? Because I agree. I think that moment where like once we launched like the page and the video, and suddenly, you know, it felt not more real but just bigger. I think kind of that jump, especially because like prior to that it was like a very like small thing, like just a handful of people I think that jumped from that to, all right, now this is like big, like, you know, we have like the whole campus's attention, and like, even like briefly there was like the whole thing with like, was it the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or somebody was like trying to write a story, and in my mind it was like, I don't know, I feel like I had never like gotten that close to like that level of like visibility before, so it was just like, whoa, like we're really out here. Like, I don't know, I feel like that is when I said overwhelmed. I think that's definitely where I suddenly like I couldn't really think about, you know, what do I want to do in doing this, like what is the cause that this is for, and I just got caught up in like, whoa, like just like steering this big ass ship, like whoa, like we're really at the front of something big, like, and I just got so caught up in that. So I would definitely feel about that being a turning point. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to like detract.
No, that's perfect. Does anyone else want to talk about like other like big turning points that like you felt, or like a moment where you're like, or a moment where it's like the surprise hit you for like the first time, you know? As Kuno said, like shit was surprising, like shit really caught me off guard. Shit, woo, oh my goodness, I was not ready for that. I was not ready for that at all. So actually I could just talk about like how, like my surprise. I think like I didn't, like it really never hit me. Like I was, like it never hit me until we had that meeting with everyone. Like until then, I was kind of bulling. I was like, it doesn't matter, like we're doing the right thing. Like, you know, everyone on board, we're doing the right thing. Like, you know, the train is leaving the station, we're doing the right thing. You know what I'm saying? And that's all that, like, that's all my mind was. Like, that's all I had to, that's all I was thinking about. But it's so much more than that. And like, I realized that. And so at that meeting, when I was in this mindset of like, okay, well, like people will realize, people will come around, like people will see what's happening. And, you know, just like hearing all this from like everyone, and okay, well, I guess some context is like we had this, like Kuno was mentioning, we had a lot of community meetings, and so there was this one really big community meeting that we had with like the entire Black community, and it was really nice seeing the Black community like gather in a space to like talk about social justice issues. But okay, so the meeting was like we were just trying to get more information out to the Black community because a lot of people were confused, a lot of people didn't know what was happening, and a lot of people had concerns, so you're just trying to do that. And so yeah, and so that meeting really like took me off guard because I didn't expect like all the pushback that we got. And in that moment, and like I've like thought about it a lot, and I've like come to like a lot of different conclusions over the time, but in that moment, all I can think about was, wow, I'm sitting up here doing this for everyone here. Like if this crowd of people was not here, if they never got admitted, this would be for them, right? And so, and I just couldn't stop thinking that if I was not there, then would anyone be up there for me? And that like broke my heart. And that is like, and like now, like I sit back and I think about it, and like it's not the case at all. But like in that moment, like that's how the surprise hit me. It shattered, like, cause again, like Noëll said, this was all a labor of love, and like it was just, anyway. So, but that's how like the surprise hit me, and that's how it hit me first. And like now I've like looked back over it, and it's not how I thought it was, and I can talk more about like what like conclusions I've come to now and stuff. But like that's like a moment where like I was like, that's how the surprise like hit me, and that's the form it took like in my feelings, or like how I was processing. But yeah, that was like my initial like reactions. But yeah.
It's cool if I jump in.
Yeah.
Because I was like at I have like notes from that meeting, like you and Noëll talking in the beginning. Like it was in the BCSC with like all the other black affinity group leaders, like just sitting around and lounge. And it was like in your guys' presentation, it was really succinct and it was generally well received. So like in my mind, after having like been talking to y'all like in the beginning stages of organizing, like I agree with the historic momentousness of the whole occasion, because like it was just coming off of these like very like black affiliate celebrations, but also there was like an air of like, while it was unfoundedly and like really black, it also came as like, oh, this is happening while all these other issues are still not having been addressed. And it kind of went, I think you guys were really going for like, you were having the same the same like reckoning with the contradiction that comes with being like a black person in an elite space like this, that like while you're here and like there have been battles fought to fight that for your presence at that space, like there's still a lot of battles that still have been waged, and like that necessarily haven't been touched on just because of the fact that like spaces like this are built on those very contradictions, or at least built on those very like inequalities themselves. And like I guess I don't know, like with Black Convocation and with like Black Alumni Reunion Weekend, a lot of alumni looking around and saying like, yo, this problem still persists, that like there's still not enough of black people representing the entirety of like brown as opposed to other people. Like it just called, I think it was reckoning with a fundamental contradiction that like pushed for like for me it seemed like it was a general push and campaign to like confront that and try to do something about it. So for me, like, and this isn't, I think you like people, at least black people and brown, have been reckoning with that and like come to terms with that in different ways, but this was one of the stronger reactions of like, yo, like let's actually try to do something about it and try to take a stand and organize like campaign against it. And the thing is just that everybody takes out a different sort of like calculus when it comes to like doing actions and being a part, or taking sort of like a risk in doing something like that. There's just like the reaction that came from the first community meeting, like how like opposite and on the other side of the polarity as opposed to like the one in the BCSC was both shocking, but also just kind of all-encompassing for like all-encompassing for like, I don't know, like being black at Brown is just like reckoning with like, oh yeah, like this is like being in this space is a result of activism, but it's also still part of this larger like racial capitalist system that only allows for a few to rise to a certain amount and never really gives out a guarantee of like equality to like whole people. I don't know if I'm just jamming around, like, but yeah, like it's just I think all that's to say is that like that moment in the community meeting was just so emblematic of like different attitudes and like what causes like large moves like that from taking hold is just like a lot of people have certain types of take a certain calculus to taking social actions, and that I don't know, like I guess the benefits of something better don't level out to like the risk of what comes with it now, and then like all the other arguments just kind of flow from the.
2 questions. Do folks have thoughts on like what could have been done differently at like those meetings, like that, because there was the Monday one like before the Wednesday, which was like really intense and like that was like kind of like negative, I think, like a little bit toward the beginning, and then there's also the BCSE one. So thoughts on what could have been like different in those meetings, but also like what do you think? Because we also received like a lot of criticism and people talked about like pushback that we got. What criticism from those moments do you think was like the most valid, and the criticism that we could like learn the most from, or at least have like applied to what we did? If people have like thoughts on either of those things. I can also repeat those.
Go ahead.
Please.
So I feel like for me the most like memorable criticism was just like the people or the number of people involved. I think when we were at that big Monday meeting, a lot of people just expressed like that they felt like they were like on a train that they weren't driving. You know, like they felt like that this movement had kind of come up, but they either didn't know about it or didn't have a voice in it, and felt like they were kind of being directed and they weren't a part of it. And I think that was the biggest one for me, because like I think it really like the idea that had been kind of brought up before, I forget where, but like kind of just at Brown about I think it was at one of the workshops, but just about there being like many different manifestations of what it is to be Black. And I think in the planning stages, I was just like, when we were going over it, just made sense to me, like, oh, like if this makes sense to me, then obviously this will make sense to like all Black people if we just say it, and everyone will just do it, because of course it makes sense. So I think that's one of the things that I think I wish would have gone differently looking back, and like would just be to have more community participation, because I think it was harder to work with that with Black Walk 50 when we were trying to sort of mobilize everybody but also catch them up to speed at the same time. So yeah, I would think just having more people throughout instead of just a them.
Sort of going off of that, I had like a very similar reaction, where to me, like, it seemed like most people weren't like upset about like any particular demand. What they were more upset about was the fact that they weren't allowed to take part in the creation of the demands. And sort of going off of that, or not necessarily not allowed, but like that they weren't involved. And I don't know if there was ever anything like more widely dispersed, but I think it was more like just like word of mouth when people got involved. So like somebody had told me, it might have been Noëll or Wassa, and then I started going to a couple meetings, which I thought was pretty interesting, and sort of like adapting that to like the other stuff that I do personally. Like now I'm like noted, so now every time I work on something, I post about it everywhere unless it's like super secret, which I thought was pretty interesting and something that like I'm trying to apply to like myself now.
To touch on what Zion said, I think that was definitely one of my the critiques that I took most to heart, was realizing that we preach this ideal of there are multiple Blacknesses. There is no set idea of what it means to be Black, but then when it came down to it, we kind of assumed that there was. But then in moving forward, when we were like deciding how we were gonna continue our effort after we had been confronted with a lot of these ideas, I think my immediate reaction, so what ended up happening was we ended up kind of softening our campaign, not softening, but changing the direction of our campaign to be less of a protest. And I think my immediate reaction to that was, okay, in an effort to demonstrate the fact that there are more than one Blacknesses, and that by labeling ourselves Black Walk 50, we were being problematic in spreading this narrative of Blackness being homogenous, we ended up not allowing a distinct form of Blackness to occur. And I think like I was very much thinking immediately afterward, okay, from now on, anytime I have this effort, if I like truly feel passionate about it, if I believe that what I'm doing was right, that I'm going to allow myself to move forward and to continue on in that path, keeping in mind what people are saying to me. But if I truly feel if it's right, if it's like a truly Black thing to do in my personal expression of my Blackness, then I shouldn't I should heed what people are saying, but I shouldn't let that derail me. And I think some of that is valid, but at the same time, I think that's not always possible, and that's like a reflection of just how difficult it is to operate in these spaces as a Black person, because we can't just take a stand for ourselves and expect people to be able to recognize the complexities that exist within Blackness. Like you in many ways are limited by the society, by the institution that you are a part of, and the fact that you will always be labeled with that title, and anything that you do will have associations and implications on others. And so I think like moving forward, that's one of the most profound impacts that I've had, is that I'm always going to be to some degree limited in my ability to do activism, because I will always have to bear the consequences and repercussions, and others will have to share those burdens with me.
Yeah, I think sort of to add on to like what all three of us were saying, I think one of the biggest things that people were upset about was like, they're just like, I don't have the capacity to like walk out. Like, and I think especially with like STEM and the way that it works at this school and today, like if you look at CS or Engine, like those kids for the most part are like clawing and inching their way through their classes in a way that I don't think was necessarily present 50 years ago. And I think that if they were to miss one or two of those classes, they would be so much further behind. And so for me, like from talking to my friends who are Engine and, you know, CS and stuff, I sort of started to better understand that that was maybe something that wasn't in the capacity of like a lot of those students, especially looking at like, you know, a lot of the times, like especially more privileged or white students, like they'll have like a lot of background in CS or in Engine and like a lot of prep school training and stuff like that. But especially for like underclassmen, like they didn't have that, you know? And so they have to really be on top of their stuff at every single moment.
A lot of the criticisms that I heard, it's a combination of both, right? Because there was like a series of meetings before that were like open to the community, and then there were like the specific community ones that were happening like in the immediate week up until the walkout. So to me, I feel like, or I treat those like two different and distinct periods of time, and that prior to that week, people had like been aware of it and like maybe shown up to like one or two meetings, or maybe had heard of it like just through the grapevine. And we're relatively like well receiving of it because it was kind of far away and it wasn't like a real concept yet. And then during that week, people were like, oh, okay, this is like actually happening. Like what is it gonna look like? What is it gonna achieve? What work is it gonna do, etc. And I think in that week, I was hearing a lot of criticisms about like the actual demands themselves, because they were very similar to demands that were kind of like pushed in 2015 and 2016. And then about like the nature of the actual walkout. And the concerns about the nature of the actual walkout, I think came up in the BCSC meeting on Monday. And that was a concern that I had when I initially kind of joined the organizing team in some way, shape, or form. Because even I was thinking like, this is something that I don't think a large part of the community would be for, because it not only means that you're missing class or you're missing a job or etc., but it like requires people to be invested in it or like in it and in the demands in a very different way than if you're saying like, oh, we're walking to University Hall and we're gonna like protest outside X, Y, and Z. So that was like a major concern that I had going in. And I know it's a concern that some other people had in voice, like during the planning process, but things just kind of like steamrolled ahead as like, this is what we're gonna do. Which is all well and good, but then it kind of like came under fire like during those meetings, the week of the walkout was happening, and kind of forced it to like be something else, like more of a commemoration, because of everything that comes with doing a walkout. Because the walkout of 68, like the implications of that were large. So people are like, if this is something that the community is gonna do and be behind, then it needs to look good, it needs to be big, it needs to try to even emulate what was done 50 years ago. And a lot of people didn't think that this walkout and the demands being placed would do that kind of work, or would even be capable of like starting conversations to get that work done. And that was a criticism that I heard that really made me rethink a lot of like how you go about crafting demands, thinking about organizing, thinking about like mobilizing the community. About the demands themselves, that was another criticism that I heard that I thought was valid, except I feel like it's something that the criticism about the demands themselves did not hold a lot of water to me, in that they were demands that could be achieved and had been like pushed before. So it's basically like doing what was done. I might mess up the year, so please forgive me. During protests that followed the 68 walkout, kind of like harkening back to what was demanded. So doing the same thing now, like looking at work that had already been done and trying to like further that agenda. So yeah, to me, the question about the demands didn't really hold water. If anything, I feel like giving people the space, like feel like they could contribute, and X, Y, and Z does. But then I thought the criticisms about like the nature of the walkout itself were like really valid and need to be reconsidered when we think about how we organize in the future.
When I hear about like criticisms of the demands, like I think back to the 2015 walkout, and I feel like people were much more willing to just take part in that action. Not even, because even in that action, like there was like, it was as if the demands that were put forth as a part of that walkout were like democratically decided. Like I remember walking out because it was just I think that there was a validation to it because of what was happening, because of the context that was happening within. Like there were like, this was in the wake of like, you know, like these police, like deaths caused by police that were happening across the country, and then specifically like acts of violence by the police in like Ivy League spaces. Like a woman in Yale's library was like kicked out of the library because she was asleep, and like I think a couple, like even in 2015, like in that fall, like a Latinx student was harassed by DPS on campus during a conference. So like we were just seeing like violence everywhere. We were just saying like we wanted to take a stop toward it. So in that sense, like there was sort of a validation before that pushed people to be like, oh, okay, like there's this stuff that's happening, we want to do something about it, and that was that outlet that was available for it. In this one, there wasn't like the only I guess pressing externality was this feeling and mood of like historic isness provided by by Black Alumni Reunion and like Black Convocation. Like there was no like real like existential threat, I guess, really posed by the rest of society by like in that context. So I guess like those criticisms for me just like were as a result of a lack of validation. Like so for me, when I hear Kuno, it's like, yo, like from this I just learned that if I have a certain strategy in mind, like just to try to bulwark through it and like stay headfast to it, I can like feed into that sentiment if like it has to be grounded in something, right? So I think that's like that validation. Like the reason why like I feel like people are just able to like kind of deconstruct and like really take aim at the criticism just because like they were able to be like, oh, this was tried previously, and not really bring up any sort of like repudiation against that. But like if you're grounded in like history and sort of like theory, not just from like college organizing in general, but just like political actions for like Black liberation in general, looking back to like people like Walter, like, and this is like me just name dropping, but like Walter Rodney, like thinking of like what he did in 68 as well, like on like the University of West Indies, or like even thinking of like another one, Fred Hampton, or of like Win Crumb, or like any, if you just think of like Black like organizing, like political like people, like, and kind of like learn from their strategies and then try to espouse that like in those current contexts. And like I think that provides enough, or at least gives people enough of a validation to be like, oh, this isn't just something that's taken lightly, but gives you the thrust of not just like the general context, but of history like itself. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember I called my dad when we were at the church the first night, and he was like, I was just telling him like, yeah, you know, it didn't go over well, like, not everybody is here, and he was like, first of all, like, zoom out for a second, like, this is just a moment in time. And also, like, this is a moment in time. Like, you and this group of people, like, tried to stand for something. And then he was telling me this story about these people that essentially, like, the idea of, like, goodwill doers or people that try to go into a community and help a community but don't necessarily listen to the people that they're trying to help. And he was talking about these people that tried to help build a banana tree farm on this island, and they planted a bunch of trees but didn't talk to any of the people living there, and the waters rose, which were like salt waters, and all the trees died. And the researchers were like, yo, to the people whose land it was, like, yo, why didn't you tell us not to plant the trees here? And the people were like, you didn't ask. And that's something that, like, when he was telling me, I was like, okay, like, I feel like I had a responsibility to talk to more people than I did. I wish that I had, like, had more just face-to-face conversations, like, yo, what are the things that you don't like about this place? And also, we, like, heard people when they wanted to add more demands, but we weren't really able to listen to them because we were on this really intense time crunch where we were like, no, we can't add these demands now because we haven't researched them, and we put in all this work to research these things that we did that we already had planned. And then, you know, we're able to almost feel like we had listened to people because we let them say, oh, these are things that I would like to be added to the list, but we didn't actually listen because we weren't able to add them. And because we were on this intense time crunch where, like, at the end of the day, something was going to happen on the 5th of December, and there was only so much time and capacity to listen to the people who we were standing for. So that's something that I'm taking away, like, okay, I really got to be, like, talking to people and listening to people if I'm doing something, you know, that I think that if I'm doing something, like, for them or with them, I guess, and even that is, like, I feel like that's just a maybe, like, for doing something for someone versus doing something with someone. Those are two totally different things. And I think we were operating from the perspective of doing things for people, for the Black community, for the community, the larger Providence community. And even if we were to think, like, larger, we ultimately didn't do things with the Providence community, and we didn't do things with all the people at Brown that we could have done things with, professors and, you know, custodians, people working in the RADI. And so that's a huge thing that I'm taking away. Like, it's got to be with the people that.
Yeah, I think there was also, like, a justification that we gave ourselves that since we are a part of that Brown community,
right,
maybe we don't have to make as extensive of an effort to reach out to them. But I think that's why such an intense division was created between us and the rest of the Black community, because we operated as though, given that we are a part of that community, we can speak on behalf of it, but that you don't get an excuse to step over people just because you're fighting for the same reasons that they might be. And then back to what Roro was saying, I think that was one of the most, in the immediate aftermath, disappointing things for me, was to realize that when organizing or when going about activism, there might need to be some existential crisis or whatever, not crisis, as you said. And I was trying to come to terms with the fact that organic or unprompted change might not work out or might not always be possible. But I think something that I also took away was that, like, as Madie was saying, this was just an isolated act. This was just one thing, that while it is reflective in many ways, this doesn't have to be the end-all be-all for lessons that we take away. Like this, just because this event, this walkout wasn't as successful as we had intended, doesn't mean that that type of action is not possible. Doesn't mean that you can't create organic change. It just means that you need to learn and strive to rethink the way you went about it the first time.
Do better.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna jump on that. Yeah, I guess like it's interesting what you said about like organic movements. Just reminded me of Guava Island with like. Okay, so I won't give any spoilers.
But that's Donald Glover's thing.
Yeah. I guess like not to talk about that, but just think of like, like just mass movements just awry or just spring from like these, just spring about spontaneously. It's like there's nothing that any type of planning could have done to keep the success of it. But I don't think that's particularly true. I think like that's like, okay, so that was just me trying to say like it takes a lot of like what Madie was saying earlier, just to say like you have to align yourself with the people. And some people, I think this like experience shows it, just like there are a lot of good criticisms about about the demands, but some of them kind of missed the point, or at least I think missed the point of the lockout in general. Some of them were just like, why didn't you try to work with administrators to get this type of stuff done? Or why didn't you reach out to this administrative head and this administrative head? Like, that is a sort of politics or sort of game that this walkout wasn't supposed to be a part of. I think like the walkout, or at least like I think like that game, like playing that type of like the former sort of game about like reaching out to the administrators and trying to like reach out and like come to some sort of terms and reach some sort of agreements with like administrators to get these to reach certain demands. Like that plays a sort of game where like you're not really getting to the type of change that the walkout was going for, something more fundamental, something really trying to create like something more egalitarian, right? And because of that, like off the bat, like some people in the community will want to play that. They're like, we're not trying to go for something fundamental. We're going for something more like we're going for something more. We're playing a different type of game, and that game requires like not conforming to that type of politics. So you're already going to exclude some people out, and that just goes to like a criticism, or at least something that I had been talking about in the beginning of the organization, which is just like being more embedded in the Providence community, because of the fact like Brown has such a parasitic relationship with the rest of Providence. Like people in the community know what Brown is and know exactly the different sort of tentacles it takes to really just like have a presence in the community, but never really be like attending to the problems too. So they'll be more willing to like take a part of this action and put themselves like on the line for that. But that requires like a real like alignment, or at least an investment by people up here like on the hill to people down there like off the hill, like really a co-aligning of interests and like I guess like an alignment of futures to really take on an institution like that. So that was the point I just wanted to make, just connect those two and be like, movements are organic only because the people will them to. Like the wheels of history aren't turned by spontaneity, but by the people themselves. And that's because it's not all people coming together to do it. It's like you have to find the people who like want to do it. And like in this type of campaign, like a lot of people on campus wouldn't want to put down the politics for that at the end of the day. Like Brown is actually such an interesting place because we come to a point where we can like have really esoteric conversations about capitalism and imperialism and like really get to the thick of it. But when it comes to push comes to shove and it comes to like risking your livelihood to actually do something about it, a lot of people are like, I don't really want to do that. And like because of that, like and that's true because like we kind of living off of those fucked up systems right now. Like Brown is built off of imperialism, it's built off of capitalism. So of course we're not gonna like we're not gonna throw away our own bag for like a future bag that might be a little better. Like that's a risk, and people don't, and that's the type of calculus that I was talking about earlier. People don't really want to do that. But if you ask people off the hill for that, like that is how like revolutions and movements are really espoused for that, because you find the people who really are willing to take the risk for that, and people off the hill would be more willing to do that. So that's the connection I was trying to draw. Sorry if that's a little drawn out.